Thank you.
So good to be here with you. The first point about questions that I want to say is this is meant to be a conversation, mostly between me and Shira, but also we want to include all of you. So we encourage you very much to share your questions. You can post them in the regular chat on the side that everyone will see. If you have an anonymous question that you'd like to ask privately, you can text Shira directly through the chat. Is that right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So before we start, I want to say that Shira grew up in the shul in Avasafim here in Highland Park that I davened in for 20 something years, but we did not actually meet for the first time. We met online actually for the first time until about 5 years ago when we collaborated on a project pushing back against the erasure of women from many of the From publications, which is another topic of conversation, but not at all disconnected from the one about stigma, but it's for another conversation. So it's great for us to be here collaborating again on a topic that's very important and dear and personal to both of us. So with that, we'll get started. So 7 months before Shira and I collaborated on that project, I had the opportunity to publish an article in a major Jewish women's magazine about a miscarriage I'd had 18 years earlier. So the question you could ask is, why did I wait to 18 years to write about it? So first of all, 18 years ago was not social media world. We didn't have as many platforms for sharing. But at the time, there were no support groups. I was in the hospital. The nurse came to me and said, would you like to talk to someone? And I had the opportunity to speak with a social worker if I wanted. But once I left the hospital, there were no support groups. There were no resources within the From community. And there were issues surrounding it that were specific to being a From Jewish woman. I had no one to talk to. I had some close friends who'd had miscarriages, so we were able to have some conversations, but really there was no platform at all for having a conversation about miscarriage. And again, this was 18 years ago. It's not ancient history, it's 18 years ago. We as Jewish women were discussing a lot of things. People were sharing, people were open, but this was not something we could talk about. And I knew intuitively, but also statistically, that there was no way I was alone. It was me, more than me and just a few of my friends. And it took the stigma of that miscarriage hung over me for 18 years before I felt comfortable and I felt I had a place to share and open up that conversation. So telling the story was the most vulnerable thing I've ever done in all my years on the planet. But I found that using my writer's platform was incredibly healing to me, even from the distance of time. But it opened up a conversation that proved healing for other people, women of all ages, young women, newly married women, women who were older, who had the opportunity to finally share this. And in fact, one woman in her 70s wrote to me to say that she had a miscarriage about 50 years earlier, and only her doctor knew and her husband knew. She'd never, ever felt comfortable sharing it. The stigma lay like such a heavy blanket over her. She felt that too much blame would accrue to her if she shared it. There was no opportunity for her to talk about it, and that she'd never let go of the pain. And opening up this conversation was what enabled her 50 years. Can you imagine carrying that karmic weight for 50 years? So the fact is that we as a community keep stigma when we convey either silently or vocally. Sometimes we don't say it, sometimes we do say it, but we convey in that way. Let's not talk about this. Is something we're not going to discuss. And what happens is it leads individuals to feel that they are unable to share their stories in a safe way. So I'm really glad that we're here talking about stigma this morning, and I'm eager to hear Shira's insights, as I'm sure all of you are as well. So Shira, let's get started, because sharing is what you do, right? That's what you do well. Mm-hmm. You do a lot of things well, but sharing is like your absolute wonder. Can you talk a little about the Layers Project magazine, the book, and how it got started and how it brought you where you are today?
Sure. So I think I know so many of you on this chat. I'm looking to see all these people. It's so wonderful to see familiar names. I can't see your faces, but I see your names, and it feels so nice to be home for a little bit. I know many of you may know I grew up on North 6th, and I went to Avazache, and we lived across the street from the Lubans. I went to our PRY, and so I'm a Highland Park homegrown girl. So it's really wonderful to be back. Thank you to Mark for inviting me in the Orthodox Forum, and to Merri for this amazing conversation that I love. So I could talk to Merri for years. So this is a thrill. I'll tell you a little bit about the Layers Project. Since many of you may know my family, you may know that I I'm the oldest daughter of the Lankin family, and I experienced chronic illness for about 8 years in my early 20s into my late 20s. And it was kind of a tricky thing. We didn't really know what was going on for a really long time. And I experienced a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings about being ill. You know, if you had known me when I was younger, you know, I was very passionate and very driven. And I wanted to be, you know, when I grew up, I got married, I had kids, and I wanted to be the perfect wife and the perfect mother. And I wanted to be like, if you came to my house for Shabbos, you would say, Shira, what can I bring? And I'd say, oh, no, nothing. I'll take care of everything. And I was kind of like a very driven, perfectionist kind of personality. And it seemed to me that the world around us, there was everybody kind of had it together, you know, about 10 years ago on social media when Facebook kind of first started. It seemed to me like everybody had it together, because at that time you would kind of post only like the perfect highlight reel of your life. Like even if your kids were killing each other, you'd get one moment where everything was good, and then you put a filter over it and you'd post it and be like, my family, and then kind of putting out to the world like everything was good. And so kind of that was the feeling that I had, with that I was the only person who was struggling, which is utterly ridiculous. But that's how it was presented. And we'll talk a little bit more about community and stigma and how we kind of sweep things under the rug, and how we don't really talk so much about, especially a long time ago, we don't talk so much about the things that are a little bit different or a little bit difficult, or the things that are kind of on the outside. So for me, I thought that everything was good with everybody else, and I was the freak that was struggling with my health. Now, that was ridiculous. And I'm a writer, and I realized, and I had graduated from social work school. I went to Hunter School of Social Work, and I realized that in order to relinquish this sense of really terrible, heavy shame that I promised you was killing me faster than illness was, I needed to write about it. I needed to put it out there. I needed to just let it go. Instead of not talking about it, I need to destigmatize the issue and just put it out there. So one day I wrote this post, and I said, hey, world, my little corner of the world, I'm sick, and I don't really know what's going on. And I'm going to try to understand. I'm going to try to make meaning for myself so I can continue to live, because this is not what I expected. And I didn't realize that I would get such an overwhelming, loving response from the community, from my community, from many of you, actually. And so when I got better, and when I say better, I mean marginally better, like I was still dragging myself out of bed, I started taking photographs, and I decided that I was going to start a photo project where I was going to interview Jewish women, and we were going to talk about what I call the challenges and triumphs of their lives. Really, what I wanted to do was talk about stigmatized and taboo topics, and really open them up through the method of personal story and photographs too. And that's how the Layers Project started. And one day I posted on my Facebook page, and I said, hey, you know, I'm looking to do this project. Would anybody want to do it with me? And within the first hour, I had 20 women reach out to me saying, me, I'm ready to tell my story. I'm ready to destigmatize this thing that I'm struggling with. And I was like, wow, there's something really powerful here. There's something transformational here that we were tapping into. And so 5 years ago, literally we just passed the 5-year anniversary, I started a blog called The Layers Project, and I interviewed Jewish women, and we talked about all different stigmatized topics. We talked about eating disorders and body image. We talked about fertility and infertility. We talked about miscarriages, and we talked about singlehood. We talked about so many things that were being swept under the rug at the time. Definitely were not being tackled on the internet at that time. Thank God, today is a different kind of climate on the internet. But at that time, it was very, very hush hush, to the point where I was like the girl who talked about hard things on the internet. And a year later, we had received so many submissions from women who were ready to stand up and become activists for their causes, and to break stigma around all these issues that are really very common and really apply to so many of us. We decided to launch a full online magazine called the Layers Project Magazine. And then a year and a half later, I made Aliyah with my family. I'm sure many of you know, my parents made Aliyah, Eric and Jeannie Lankin, they made Aliyah, and my sister Gabi made Aliyah, my brother Benji made Aliyah. You guys know Aliyah. So many of you know them. I see all these beautiful names on here. And then my husband Scott and I, we made Aliyah with our 2 kids. And within the first week, of Aliyah. They always say Mishana Makom, Mishana Mazal. I got a message from a big Jewish publisher who reached out to me and asked me to create a coffee table book of photographs and images of stories that I had told over the previous few years for the Layers Project. And it wasn't a good fit with that publisher, but they encouraged me to pitch elsewhere. And I pitched it to Koren Publishers in Jerusalem. And they were so excited about it. They said, yeah, come in. And we sat down. And within the first month of my Aliyah, I had a book deal in hand, and they said, we don't want old stories. We only want new stories. So they sent me on a journey. My first year of Aliyah, I spent traveling up and down this country, interviewing Jewish women. So it's 34. Here's the book. 34 stories of Jewish women from all over the world living here in Israel, talking about stigmatized and taboo topics. The list is so long I couldn't even tell you, but these women are incredible and resilient and phenomenal. And this book is really, it came out this summer, and it's been really transformational, and definitely for me. So today Layers is it's a thriving magazine. We have a book out there, and I'm dedicated to telling these stories and breaking stigma. That's what I'm doing.
Good for you. And the book is beautiful. And I also just want to say before I ask the next question, as someone who on my own, but also I did a story with you, there is a sense of giving people a place to throw off that weighted blanket that you provided, that I think some of us want to, but we don't know where, we don't know how, we don't know where to start. So having a framework available, a safe, from framework, someone who understands all of the ins and outs is also very, very helpful. So before we move on to that, let's define stigma. It's a different thing somewhat within the Orthodox community. How does it manifest specifically within what I like to call our little shtetl, right? With its own rules and regulations. How does it manifest around in our shuls and schools, around our Shabbos tables, the formal conversations, the way the rabbis speak from the pulpit, all of the different ways, and also specifically within the framework of the shidduch system? Yeah,
so like the first day of social work school, what they teach you is about this concept of the closed community. And what a closed community is when people, they don't really go out and they don't really go in. And there's a close-knit, it's like the shtetl, right? It's like a close-knit community which has its own rules and its own narratives and its own ways of operating. And the frum community is a closed community. It doesn't matter whether you're living in Highland Park or in Teaneck or in Jerusalem, right? We have a very, very specific set of mores, a very specific expectations, definitions for success and failure. And that's incredibly important to know off the bat. And what happens is when you experience something that's we considered stigmatized today, that doesn't really fall within the lines of, I'm not going to say what's typical, because that's not necessarily true. It can be absolutely typical, just what's acceptable. Right? There's a huge difference. If you fall outside the lines of what's considered acceptable, what happens is we develop a sense of otherness as individuals. And what happens is that dynamically, a person who's othered will withdraw, or they'll drown, or if people know in the community what's going on with them, sometimes they pull away because they're afraid that their otherness will rub off on them, whether it's community or family members. And in family systems, like, otherness can be poisonous, you know, and the shtetl is a kind of family system, but basically it's where the stigmatized issue, right? And that person, their needs get sublimated for the good of everybody else in the system to maintain what we call like a status quo. In shidduchim, for example, right? If somebody is suffering with something, you know, it could be as simple as a cancer, a certain type of inherited genetic cancer, or it could be mental illness, or it could be an eating disorder, whatever it is. You know, somehow the needs of that family member get sublimated for everybody else, because you shouldn't tell anybody, because chas v'shalom, that such and so should find out, and then your sister won't get a shidduch, right? We've all heard this like 1,000 times. This is something that is like, it happens literally every day in our community. That's a really big problem. And what happens is, that when there's lack of sharing from people who are struggling with a sense of otherness because they're dealing with this stigmatized issue, it can oftentimes lead to ignorance amongst the rest of us because we don't even know that it's happening underneath our noses, right? You know, how many times have you heard, oh, such and such issue doesn't exist. Jews don't drink. Jews don't suffer from addiction. We don't have anybody with LGBTQ issues in our community. We don't have sexual abuse in our community. Domestic violence, us, Jews, domestic violence. So what happens is when people are not given the space to talk about things, we don't. And so what happens is inherently there's kind of an ignorance that festers and then kind of erodes the community because we don't even know what we should be educating ourselves about. Right? We don't even know what the needs are. And that's a huge problem because for many of us who want to be forward thinking, want to be inclusive, want to be a part of the solution, we can't know what the needs are unless we know. And if no one's talking about it, we're not going to know. And then you have the other issue. So for the people who are experiencing these stigmatized issues, they feel unsupported, they feel shamed and misunderstood, and they're suffering alone. And that is a horrible, horrible, horrible place to be. You know, and when you have issues that are taboo in the community and we leave our vulnerable, feeling like they have no voice amongst us, that is a recipe for disaster, quite literally. And, you know, like, for example, let's say there's a couple experiencing infertility. You should know 1 out of every 8 couples, that's the statistics, 1 out of every 8 couples will experience infertility. And you could have a situation where if it's not, you know, people aren't talking about infertility, or it's not accepted, or we don't even have the awareness to be sensitive about it. You have a situation where you have young couples going to a Shabbos meal. So you could have like the couple that goes with their parents or their friend's Shabbos meal, and the friend and the parents' friends go, so when are you going to have your baby? You've been married a long time. You know this. You've heard this, right? You probably, it happened, you know, you've been at that meal, right? Or you're a young couple, you're so, you know, associating with other young couples, and, you know, the entire time you're sitting at the meal, everyone's talking about babies and pregnancy. What stroller did you get? What car seat do you like? You know, and then you have this couple who's sitting there, and people make all sorts of crazy assumptions about people. You know, it's amazing the way that we can misconstrue the truth just to avoid reality. You know, it's much easier to misconstrue truth so that we don't have to deal with it. But, you know, if we're completely ignorant to the fact that it exists and people don't have a voice, then we have no idea that we need to be sensitive. We don't know how, because no one's ever told us, no one's ever taught us. And so that's a really big problem. And so opening up stigmatized conversations in the community will allow us to approach everyone in our community with more sensitivity and more thoughtfulness. And it'll make space for healing conversations and for those on the outside to take a step inside. And because at the end of the day, are we really a healthy community if we have, you know, this issue, this, you know, lack of support for the people that need healing within us? Not really.
Right. I want to go back to what you started with earlier about cancer. So it's a perfect example because there was such stigma around cancer in general. People would call it the Mayflower. They would go, cancer. Like, people wouldn't talk about it. And women's cancers all the more so, because God forbid we should say, you know, ovarian or uterus, like people couldn't say it. It was just something we couldn't discuss and it wasn't unique to the Jewish community or the Frum community. That was a broader stigma. So now, thank God, we're in a better place on that. But breaking down stigma, you have to start somewhere, often with people taking the risk and being vulnerable and sharing their stories. So can you talk a little about the balance people can strike when they share their stories? What's healthy and healing for them, and what are the possible costs versus the potential payoffs of them putting themselves out there, both for them as individuals and in terms of, let's say, them doing it as an investment in healing the community?
Yeah, so I think that this needs to be done in baby steps, right? Because first off, no change is done like that. Sometimes we have swells of support. We have like crisis that breaks a whole conversation open, like we did with Chaim Wilder, you know, a few months ago, where that was an issue of sexual abuse. And then there was like, just like just a cacophony of sound of people sounding off about it. That happens sometimes, but it's very, very rare. Usually change comes in baby steps. And first off, let's unpack why someone would want to share their story, right? Because if you're in a situation where it's stigmatized, people aren't talking about it, and there's shame associated with it, why would people want to share? Like, what's the benefit? So the first is someone's looking for support, right? They need help, or they need a shoulder to lean on, or they just need someone to be there to listen, to feel seen. Validation is incredibly important in the healing process, or in the survival process. You know, sometimes we're dealing with issues that it really just requires our survival, but we don't really feel like we have an outlet to exist. It's incredibly toxic and really counterintuitive for that healing process. Feelings of safety around stigmatized topics happen over time, right? It starts in drips and drabs. So it starts at first with one conversation. You go to one person that you trust and you say, hey, you know, and you really have to think about it. Have I disclosed anything personal to this person in the past? How did they handle it? What kind of response did they give me? Were they able to contain my pain without projecting their stuff onto me? Were they able to listen? These are really important questions when you choose somebody to talk to. You know, a one-on-one conversation is a great place to start. Then you can move to a group. Maybe it's a family. Maybe it's a group of friends. Maybe it's a support group, you know, like a clinical support group. It could be people at your shul, it could be neighbors on your block, you know, but have you figured out the story that you want to tell about your experience so that people can understand, and also can these people receive it? Once you've kind of hit these markers and these kind of barriers to entry, then the big thing is okay, well, am I ready to be an activist for my cause? Am I ready to stand up and break stigma? You know, breaking stigma happens in little moments, but it also can happen in big moments where somebody stands up and they put their face out there, and they put their name out there and their experiences, and they say, hi, hello, my community. This is something that happened to me, that's happening to me, that I'm experiencing now, before, in the future, whatever it is. But it takes an incredible amount of resilience and courage, tremendous courage, to stand up and to say, you know, this is happening to me, especially when no one's ever discussed it before, or it's like something that's like whispered about, or something that is just not really kind of widely understood. That's incredibly important and difficult and kind of transformative. I think in the end, stigma breaking can happen on many forms, but really for the person who's doing the work, the question you have to ask yourself is, what's your goal? What's your end goal? You know, is what I'm doing going to match what I would like to do in the end? Is this avenue, this person, this place, this group, is the reaction they're going to have match what my expectations are? Because it can be incredibly painful to put yourself out there and then to be rejected soundly, out of hand. I've seen it happen, and it's incredibly painful. And so we really need to, as people who are looking to move things forward, we have to really think about what feels safe, what feels nourishing, what feels nurturing. And I think that the truth is that the onus is really on both the community and individuals. The community, it's hard to know what we need to know if we don't know it. That being said, we have the ability to create spaces that are safe and healthy for people to share if they need to. You know, we should be the kind of place that if somebody needs help, we should be the kind of people that other people know, if I'm in trouble or I'm suffering or I need help, you can come to me. You can come to this shul, this group, this neighborhood, and people will be there to support you and to nourish you and to help you heal. And that's kind of on the community. That's our responsibility, you know? So yes, we may not always know, but we have to listen. We have to be there. We have to be present, and we have to continuously create spaces for empathy. You know, like the Layers Project was developed to be a safe space for women to share their stories and be heard and to be validated. And in response, we broke stigma. tremendous stigma. There's always work to be done, but the validating, it happened, this being seen happened, the support happened. And that's because the space was created to do that. But any community can do that. You don't have to be online. You don't have to be, specific. And as a community,
oh, sorry, I thought you were done. Can you give 2 examples of the Layers Project specifically, or 1 or 2 examples where you saw the process unfold the way you envisioned it, that began to chip away at stigma? It gave women what they needed to share their stories. It gave them the validation. Can you, I think maybe make it personal with 2 specific, 1 or 2
sure.
stories?
Basically, there's so many, it's so hard to choose from.
Pick one of your favorites.
I have a few. I'll give you a good one, just a recent one. Okay. Recently in the Layers book, we published a story about a woman who experienced sexual assault. And here, I'll put it this way. There are personal implications here where there are personal lives that have changed. And then I'll share some communal things that I've seen shift. Personally, so there was this woman who read the book, read this chapter on sexual assault, and she reached out to her therapist and said, I know I've been seeing you for a long time. I got this feedback from the woman and the therapist. I've been seeing you for a long time, but there's something you don't know about me. But I read this chapter in this book, and I feel like I'm strong enough now. Like reading about her makes me feel strong enough to tell you that I've been sexually assaulted and I need help.
Wow.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Right. And we have so many stories like this. There was another story. This one, oh, Abby, she's right behind me. I don't know if you can see her. I have a whole bunch of beautiful portraits behind me. But Abby is Abby Sophia. She's an incredible woman. I'm sure many of you have heard of her. She's a very famous photographer in Teaneck. And 5 years ago when we started, she was one of the first people, and she told her experience about infertility. And I got a message from a woman who told me that for the first time in her life, she had been experiencing infertility for 10 years. She sent this story, Abby's story, to her mother, to her sisters, to her husband, to her friends, because she never had the language to describe what it felt like, how she was suffering. But Abby did. And it was like her own experience coming out of somebody else's mouth. And so she shared these stories to these people in her life, and she got support for the first time in a 10-year journey. And that's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. Now, on a larger scale, on a communal scale, one of my favorites was in June of 2020, right? So during the Black Lives Matter stuff that was going on. We ran a story from this amazing young woman named Yafi, who shared her experience about being Black and Jewish and what it was like. I think it was my Black father's legacy, I think it was called. The story was shared about, I don't even know, it was read by about 250,000 people. That's how far it got. And Yafi had been living in a community where, her race had never been addressed ever in her whole life. She grew up in a frum community in the States, and her race had never, ever been addressed. And the rabbi of the community sent out her article, and there was a ripple effect in the neighborhood that people were reaching out to her and her mother, and also, but having conversations themselves. They had Jews who were people of color in their neighborhood for 30 years and never discussed it. And then Yafi stood up and said something out loud, and all of a sudden, the whole conversation changed. It really, really drastically changed in that neighborhood. And that I thought was a fascinating outcome. Sometimes I get a lot of how do I messages. So how do I offer support? How do I talk to my loved ones around these difficult topics? And that happens a lot too, where when women stand up or people stand up and they share their experiences, it educates people. it truly educates people, and there's like a ripple effect. They want advice about how to create more supportive spaces for issues that they don't really even know enough about. And the writers themselves end up fielding a lot of these questions where communities are being built around them. And they'll get like hundreds of messages after posting an essay on layers from people who either have experienced the same thing, experienced something similar, knew somebody who experienced something like that, or want advice about how to be kinder, how to be more empathic, how to be more sensitive. And so empowering individuals empowers communities. And I've seen it over and over again. And I love to say, like, mitzvah goreret mitzvah, stigma breaking breaks more stigma. The more we talk, it's unbelievable. Last week I posted something on sexual assault or sexual abuse on Layers, a story. And then I got like 10 emails from women, really, really heavy topics, all different topics. Because they said, this woman did it. I've experienced my own struggle. I can do it too. So it's not even like talking about infertility only begets breaking the stigma for infertility. No, you could talk about infertility and then someone stands up to talk about sexual abuse, and someone talks about emotional neglect and domestic violence, and it's a ripple effect. And I think it makes the community better and stronger.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. I want to talk a little about, if we can, about the difference. Sometimes people will say, well, there's no stigma about this because there's organization X, or I know there's a support group that meets in my shul once a week, so that's not a stigma thing. The rabbi knows about it. It's not stigma anymore. What's the difference between people facing a certain challenge, having mutual support, having an organization they can turn to, and being able to say that the community has really, really begun to do the hard work to destigmatize something in particular? Because they're not the same. Off the bat, there are many, many excellent, truly excellent nonprofit organizations out there that are doing this work. They pick a topic, somebody starts it because they've got a passion, they've personal experience, and they run with it. And they're offering education, and they're offering services, and they're offering counseling and safe spaces. And that is phenomenal. And that work is being done. They create online spaces, social media spaces around their work to even further their cause. But that work is just the beginning. That's just the beginning, because their job is to, to start it, to open a conversation, or to be a safe harbor for those people who are experiencing or who are in crisis right now. But these things are still highly stigmatized. We have many nonprofits dedicated to mental health stigma, or mental awareness, like tackling stigma directly, not even providing counseling services. But that doesn't mean that mental health isn't highly stigmatized. It is, and I think that until people feel safe and comfortable, supported and included, the work isn't over. And it's our job to take it to the next level. Okay, so what is my favorite question? But what are the most critical, because there are so many, there are just so many. What do you think are the most critical stigma frontiers we need to breach right now? Because there are so many, like we can't do everything at once, but what do you think is absolutely critical for the well-being of us as an Orthodox Jewish community? Yeah, so many. So well, many. That's why I want you to choose. I like to think of the family as kind of like the heart of the community. If the family is healthy, if marriages are healthy, if children are healthy, then we're all healthy, pretty much, in the sense that that's the root of the community. I think that domestic violence is a really big issue. Get refusal is a really big issue. Get refusal happens all the time. It happens in our community all the time. It doesn't just happen in more right-wing communities. Oh, that would never happen here. It happens all the time. I remember a few years ago, I had a very, very close friend whose husband withheld the get. And I remember I almost blacked out because I was so enraged. My community? How is it possible? It happens every day. I hear people every day, literally saying things like, oh, well, good for him. It's a tool in his toolbox.
you know, if until we've really truly dealt with this, you know, acknowledge that get refusal is a form of spousal abuse, we, you know, that's something we really got to handle. LGBTQ mental health. We have many members of our communities who are LGBTQ, many, and the sense of otherness and not belonging. I mean, the stories that I've heard of what it was like to be a gay person sitting in Shir or sitting in this place or in shul, and having certain things said to them directly to their faces. We haven't figured it out yet. We haven't figured out how to negotiate the halachic implications versus the emotional things versus the Torah sources versus real life human beings sitting in front of our faces. And the mental health component to it is what I'm specifically talking about, is a crisis. It's literally a crisis that we need to address. As I was talking before, infertility, one out of eight couples experiences infertility. So until it becomes like that, like it's like in the front of our mind that, you know, be careful what you say to people because you never know what they're struggling with. You'd be shocked. I experienced secondary infertility. I have 2 children. Baruch Hashem, Hashem blessed me. Okay. You would be shocked at the things that people have said to me over the years about having children, not having children. Mir Hashem, you should have more children. Efshar. Mir Hashem, Hashem can do anything. Like, you don't even know what's going on. And like, you have no idea. Like, you'd be shocked. It's really horrifying
anymore, but
yeah, fair enough. But other people would be shocked.
Right.
I think that the crisis, the shidduch crisis of older singlehood, and I'm specifically talking about the fact that there are many, many women who are incredible women who do not feel like they have a place in our Orthodox communities because they're not married and have children. It's a shanda, and it needs to be addressed. You know, there's this like breaking stigma, and there's also solutions, and there's also, you know, like conversations and inclusion, and that's really important. And the last thing I'll say is addiction. I think that addiction is really prevalent in our communities. I remember growing up in Highland Park, teens, gambling, drugs, drinking. I remember it all, and it manifested in many people's adult lives, and many adults struggle with this, and it's something that it's not talked about. It's just like totally swept under the rug. I remember it was like a non-issue, but it's very much an issue. And obviously also mental health, just generalized mental health. You know, it's so stigmatized.
Such a huge umbrella.
It's huge.
So not my last question, but we're getting there. I think we need to develop as a community and as individuals the kind of empathy that recognize, because this will apply to every one of those things you talked about and all the ones that you didn't get to, that not every story is about us, right? That others within our community may have different experiences or experiences that may not follow a typical arc of the narrative that we sort of lay out for our community. So you started with some of them, but what are tachlis ways I can, you know, someone who wants to do this, who wants to do the right thing, can be more than woke? Like, you know, what can they do as individuals, as a member of a shul, as a member of a community, to make room for people to share their stories? Not everyone's going to start an organization. Not everyone's going to start a support group. Not everyone's going to start Layers Project 2. Yeah. You know, like what, and not everybody is going to be comfortable sharing openly, but maybe they want to share locally. So what kind of things that can we tell people they can do in a very practical day-to-day way? Can they read things? Can they reach out to people? What can they do other than just dropping off a challah or Shabbos when they kind of know, or when they hear a rumor of something and they want to approach something? How do we go about doing this in a way that's practical, that doesn't feel invasive, that we don't feel like the neighbor who's looking inside your uterus to ask why you're not having more children, right? You know, these people, there's a balance. How do people strike that balance? Because I do think people are stymied in some way by just not knowing what the right thing is to say, and when is it appropriate to say something at all. So what do you recommend?
Okay. First off, as individuals and as a community, we need to develop what I call the lexicon of empathy. Right. We need to develop language, because empathy is like a muscle. You know, the more we use it, the stronger it gets, and the more we're able to engage with really difficult stuff, with more ease, like with more fluency, I guess I would say. In terms of that very specific question that you asked at the end about how do we engage with people where we're not sure if something is going on, always let them lead. We don't want to butt in people's lives. Sometimes, you know what I do? I'll go up to somebody and I'll be like, how's it going? Like really intensely, I'll look at them and I'll say, what's going on with you? I'm here, listening. And just hold it, hold this space. Sometimes we jibber jabber because we need to fill the space because we feel so awkward. So we just don't do that. Just be present. I want to take you out for coffee. How's it been going? What's going on with you? How are you? And just listen. Truly listen. It's so hard. Listening is very hard because, we're used to quick conversations and back and forth and sitting with other people's pain can be uncomfortable. It could be so uncomfortable so sometimes we just talk. We just talk over them because they're having a hard time saying what they want to say. And then we say stupid things and they're like, why did I just say that? I didn't mean to say that. Shh, don't say anything. Give them an opening. And if they want to share with you, they will. And just say and if they've chosen to say nothing, be like, listen, I just want you to know I'm always here for you. And whatever you suspect, you could put something, I'll always believe you. I'm always here to support whatever you need. I can be there, and if you say it and
right.
If you say it and you mean it,
right.
And you work really hard and intentionally to hold that space. It's hard to do. It's really hard to do, but people might feel, dropping off a challah is nice. Don't get me wrong. Showing up is very nice. Being there is nice. What can I, and people always say, people say, let me know if you need anything. Ain't nobody going to tell you that they need anything. They're not. But if you said, I'm bringing you some lunch today, what do you want? Or you can say, I can pick up your kids from school today. I can come with you to your mother's next appointment at the hospital. You want me to make that call? Can I make a call for you to so-and-so? You know what I mean? I'm going to send help in the house this week. I know you're having a hard time. I'm thinking about you. Sometimes I remember when I was sick, I pulled away a lot. It was hard. I didn't have language for what I needed or what I wanted to say. And the friends that were really stuck by me would send me a text message, just said, I'm thinking about you. Sometimes they sent me a text message every day. I'm here. I'm thinking about you. Just because you're suffering is not going to push me away. And when you're ready for me, I'll be here. That's pretty helpful because we can't control how quickly or how slowly or how it's going to work, for when people feel ready to talk. Everybody's going to have their own pace and some people might never, they just really want to know that you're there. They want to know that no matter what they're experiencing, that you're going to love them and you're going to nourish them and you're going to still be their friend or their sister or their neighbor, whatever it is. And on a communal level, we have the ability to develop language. So that was the first, I answered the second part of your question first. Now I'm going to answer the first part of the question, which is about how we as a community or as individuals can move things forward, even if we're not ready to be an activist. What can we do, tachlis wise? So back to this lexicon of empathy, we need to develop language to talk about specific things, about difficult things. Here's an example. When it comes to sexual abuse, right? If we have children or grandchildren, we have the opportunity to teach people how to talk and also to tell them that we are a safe space. So we can say things like, we're going to use anatomically accurate words for body parts. We're going to talk about pleasure and consent. We are going to talk about what's safe, who is safe, what's not safe, who you can trust. And if you ever have something, you could say, if you ever have something you need to tell me, I'll believe you. If you're ever in trouble, I'll be there. Like these words really go so far in implanting in the people who we love's mind that we're safe. We're a person who can handle it. Whatever chas v'sholom happens to them, we're there, and I think at the end of the day, like if your shul is hosting or your community is hosting a topic on a stigmatized event, a stigmatized topic, show up, listen, give feedback, loving feedback, support, make people feel seen, make people feel like their stories and their experiences matter. Know that they are experts because of their lived experience, and treat them as such. And it will really go a long way. And if you know a family that's struggling, invite them to your house, make them food, be sensitive to their feelings, like if you want to educate yourself, go to these nonprofits that we talked about and educate yourself. How do I reach out to them? You could reach out to them and you could say, I'd love to talk to somebody one-on-one, someone who has personal experience, someone who can educate me. Is there anybody that you can guide me to? That goes a really long way because, issues are not what we see on TV or movies or reading books.
These are real life.
But usually not. And I think that lived experience is much more powerful and transformational. But just keep showing up, bring those meals, send those text messages, and show these people that you want them in your life because they have so much to offer.
I think what you said earlier also about just breaking down stigma, it's a baby step process. This also, I think, baby step process. People who have been living with shame for a long time, a short time, they're not going to just be like, whoo, it's going to take a while till they feel comfortable, even with people they care about, because sometimes people turn when they reveal something deeply personal, that breaking down of the shame they feel is going to be not necessarily be a quick process. So by warming up to it, I think it's a very important thing that you said. Before we go to question, we're on questions, right? I think it's really important that Shira tells everyone where to buy her beautiful book.
Oh, sure. Okay. So this book, you can buy it at your local Jewish bookstore. You could purchase it from korenpub.com. And if you do that, you can use code layers10 for 10% off your order. Or you can get it from Amazon. They also carry it on Amazon.
Okay. I saw a few questions pop up. Did you see them?
Yeah, let me see. There's some halachic questions.
Shira, why don't you also share with people how best, if they have questions, they can send some questions into you.
Oh, right now, if you send them to me in the chat as a direct message, then I'll get them.
Thank you, Mark, for reminding me about that. Pop up, but they disappeared.
Yeah, well, now I see them.
Okay.
A lot of people just sent hello messages. That's very nice. Hello, everybody.
Right. Welcome. Right, they're listening.
Okay, so Tzvi says, Onas Devarim, rules of Lashon Hara, lo samod al dam re'echa, all examples maybe that apply here. I'm not sure what the question is, but well, I'll just speak to that issue of Lashon Hara. We talked a lot about this when Chaim Walder, when that whole thing broke, about what is Lashon Hara. Is it Lashon Hara to say what has happened to you when someone has victimized you? Or, I think what's important to what Tzvi is saying is that there's actually a lot to be said here about that. Sometimes it's dafka, not, do I think that a halachic guide is needed?
Maybe it depends.
No, I think that these are lived experiences, and I actually think that in the past.
I don't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I don't hear you.
Oh, that's weird. Oh, hold on.
I can hear you fine.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Mark, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Merri, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah,
I think the jack fell out of my microphone.
You're back.
Okay, I think that obviously, as Torah Jews, Das Torah is very important, right? It's something that we engage with all the time. We have our Rebbeim, they're important to our lives, to Nida, to Kasher, to this, to that, so many parts of our life. It happens to be that oftentimes Das Torah is consulted about these kinds of issues, and it's not handled super well. Not always, right? We know in certain situations where a lot of people, Rebbeim, knew that certain things were going on and didn't do anything, or Rebbeim are not necessarily having the kind of the clinical skills to handle people in crisis. Now, Baruch Hashem, in our world, our Rebbeim have received a different level of pastoral training. I know Dafka in YU and Smicha, a lot of those guys are being trained at the social work program, but they're Dafka getting like clinical pastoral counseling. I think it's really, really, really going to enrich the community. And you know, it depends on the person. If you're the kind of person who goes to your rabbi to really consult about your life matters, then yeah, then that's a good idea for you. If you're somebody who wants to share what happened to you with your friend or that you're struggling, I don't think a rabbi needs to be involved in that. You know, is it important to consult, or can it be helpful to consult your family rav so they can be a support to you? Absolutely, 100%. 100%. There were so many times that my Rav in Fair Lawn, where I was living when I was sick, and after I'd gotten married, was a huge part. He was a part of my team, you know, someone who could really support me. The rabbi and the rebbetzin were people who really, truly could support me in my illness and in my healing. So I really think it depends on the kind of person that you are and what you're looking for and what the issue is. In terms of Lashon Hara, what I will tell you is that Layers is extremely, extremely careful, besides for the fact that Israel has very, very strict libel laws. I do not tell stories about other people. So if there's a person who wants to come and talk to, tell a story on Layers, like I received a submission yesterday from a woman who wants to talk about her ex-husband. Not happening on Layers, because yeah, there are absolutely implications for Lashon Hara. Absolutely. Like, this is supposed to be a healing space. And frankly, storytelling for the purpose of healing should be for the purpose of healing, as opposed to malshing people or destroying relationships. So absolutely, there can be implications of Lashon Hara in this. But I think if it's you, it's your story, it's your business. it's your choice to share, to not to share. But if you're somebody who likes to get guidance from rabbis about the minutiae of your day-to-day life, then that's a good fit for you to consult with a rabbi for sure. Is there a posek who's educating these matters? Absolutely. I can't rattle them off for you, but definitely there are, for sure. For sure, there are great poskim who are very aware of family issues and mental health. I mean, like, look at Rabbi Twersky, hello shalom. Like, he was an incredible person who really truly understood mental illness and addiction and humans and tshuva. And absolutely, there are, Baruch Hashem, still people out there who one can turn to for such sensitive topics. Let's see what else. Merri, do you have any questions?
Well, I thought, why don't you tell people how they could share their story? How do they reach you if they don't want to do it? It's like, what options do people have, and how does someone reach out to you to share a story through the Layers Project?
There are so many ways.
So
the Layers, let's count the ways. So the Layers Project is on Facebook and on Instagram at the Layers Project, on both pages. And we have a website, theLayersProjectMagazine.com, and you can find my email on the website and be in touch with me that way, for sure. And I get emails every day from people. So I'm looking forward to hearing from whoever would like to reach out. Wait, there's some more messages. Any advice on steps we as individuals and as a community should or could take to engage or confront the people who want, whether consciously or less than fully consciously, to perpetuate the stigmas? And any comments on the stigmas associated with men? Oof, this is a great question. I have been on a roll with this lately. Everybody's been asking me this, which is very interesting because I work with women. I'll answer the second question first. There is a big problem in the frum community, right? In Israel, I was interviewed on the Karin podcast last week. I think it came out, and we had a whole conversation about men and women and kind of like the gap between our ability to self-actualize emotionally or to grow and develop because of encouragement in either space or lack thereof. And somebody listened in and gave feedback that she thought that in Israel, there were many spaces for Dati Lumi men, young men to be encouraged to speak in emotional language. I think that's a little ridiculous. I think there probably was one or two schools that, had a good counseling staff. In Israel, there's a tremendous machismo here for men. The army and protecting our borders, and that's really important. But there isn't so much of a stress of emotional language. How do we dialogue? How do we converse? Breaking stigma. I can be emotionally vulnerable. It's the same in America, except instead of machismo, we have intellectualism. Everything is very intellectualized for men. Excuse the broad stroke, which I don't love, but it's true. In our communities, men are raised to be very intellectual, and they're not necessarily given the same kind of encouragement or language to talk about their feelings or emotions. I've read 100 pieces from women who experience infertility. I've never read one from a man, never once. And it happens just as often. And so, I think that there's a real dearth of opportunity, really. There's no space. We need to make these spaces for men to express themselves and to find healing and to find nourishment, because men are suffering just as much as women. These aren't just women's issues. Everything that we've discussed applies to both genders. And that's a really big problem. And we need to find a solution to that as a community, because it's incredibly important, because this comes back to the family structure. If men and women are communicating differently, women have the opportunity to find healing in community, which is really important, and men do not. It's going to erode marriages. It's going to erode family structures. What happens to our sons? What happens to our daughters? It's the shidduch crisis gets worse and worse because there's going to be like a maturity gap that widens and widens because women are encouraged to talk about their feelings and men are not. How's that going to work in marriage? How's that going to practically, Lamaisa, how's that going to work? So absolutely, it's something that we need to work on. There's so many stigmas associated with men, and men deserve to be nourished too, to be seen, to be validated, to be heard, and to be on this journey of healing with us. So absolutely 100%. And to the second question, Mark, about how do we engage with someone who wants to perpetuate stigma? Whew, that is tough. That's really tough. Sometimes we could take like a not my circus, not my monkeys approach to it, in the sense that you don't have to engage with everybody who's espousing something that might be toxic for you. You know what I mean? We have the opportunity to be really selective about who we engage with, what we engage with, and we can't fix everybody and everything. We can't. We can only hold our ground. So if somebody is projecting something onto you that feels really toxic or feels counterproductive or unhealthy, you don't have to engage with it. You can step away. You can have a dialogue if you think that the dialogue could be healthy. Sometimes you absolutely can have a healthy dialogue, but everybody knows, like, no Facebook post ever changed anybody's mind. Like when we're posting to our echo chambers and we're like, like putting out what we think out there, and then the people who agree with us are going to comment on it, but like the people who don't agree with us and are reading it, you didn't change their mind probably from a Facebook post. But a good, honest conversation might change somebody's mind. Sharing might change somebody's mind in the sense of, hey, I know that you feel this way about X, Y, and Z, but I just want to share with you my personal experience. You'd be shocked, about how transformative that can be. So, it's really up to you to decide who to engage with, what to engage with, what's going to be safe for you or nourishing for you or maybe toxic for you. And but it's definitely an important question, because there are people like that all around us. So it's a good question to ask. Here's another one.
Pop up in the main chat, but I can't access it. So
In regard to men versus women in the case of infertility, Netziv and Parshat Vayetze provides an interesting approach into why a woman in particular feels the pain of infertility. All right, sure. But talk to many men in our communities who can't have children and experience their own kind of pain. And so I think that a modern approach to psychology and to feelings would argue otherwise. Yes, okay, so it's a woman's role in the frum community to have children, to birth children. That's true, but that doesn't mean that men don't feel, and that doesn't mean that they don't deserve a space or need a space to express themselves. I've heard gripping and horrific, painful testimonies from men who have lost babies, infant loss. Could we say that a woman is going to feel that harder than a man? Who can say? Who can say? It's so individual. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. Just a comment, but infertility is a couple's problem, which men and women may internalize differently, but stating it like it's a women's problem versus men is part of stigmatizing infertility. Yeah, it could be. So, it's just important to keep in mind that all different types of people have all different types of reactions to things. And so especially by gender, to block people in by gender, it's kind of counterproductive, because also there's, experiences of men watching their wives experience infertility treatments, the men experiencing infertility treatments. Have you ever heard a man talk about what it's like to go through an infertility treatment? There are many complicated emotions that come with that. Shame, confusion, humiliation, hope, fear. And so men need spaces too. Any more questions, Merri?
I don't have any. I think I did see things pop up, but I can't access them. That's the only problem. Like there were things in the chat that popped up.
Mm-hmm.
See anything? Like they flashed and then they went away.
Yeah, it's really just comments as opposed to questions. Many comments.
No, but I think this was fantastic. I think this was a great beginning, right? I think this is more than a baby step. This is at least a couple of baby steps, right?
A little jump.
But I think it's great that just the fact that we were able to have this forum within the Orthodox forum, right? That this is community-wide, that so often these conversations really are just women, right? That this is open in a broader way to more people, that different people have the chance to hear. And I hope very much that people, when they end this call, that they think that if it does nothing else but inspire people to think more sensitively, or maybe it opens their heart a little to something that they wanted to tell, it's so important. It's so important. And as someone who shared different stories, as a writer and also just as a member of a community, I have always found it healing. And the person who says that stupid thing at the end is just not the person who's going to be your person, right? They're not your person, but it's better than being isolated. And it's a start, because no human story is ever entirely unique. It's just a variation on right? We're all human. We all suffer the wide range, and we enjoy the wide range. So it's just our unique experience. So thank you.
Merri, I just wanted to thank you for hosting this and for this incredible conversation. It means so much to me to continue our friendship, our Highland Park friendship that started after Highland Park, but thousands of miles away. And Mark, thank you so much for inviting me and for your vision for this and for opening this forum. It's really, this is visionary stuff, and Highland Park is on the forefront. Highland Park, Taka Mamish #1.